Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 110 of the Citrix session. I'm your host, Andy Whiteside. I've only got one guest with me today, but a very important guest, and honestly, a good friend of XenTegra's and the Citrix community, Geremy Meyers. Geremy, what's your official title these days?
My official title is Senior Sales Engineering Manager for the commercial team in the Southeast and East Central. So if there's an acronym, it's a mouthful, but yeah, that's what I do these days.
You know what? Sometimes it's better just to say it than to come up with an acronym.
That is so true.
Yeah, you and I were just talking about things at Citrix and how things are going, and I love what you said. Right, it's all about building culture and community and maintaining culture and community. I think that's a lot of people are good about building stuff, but not maintaining stuff. And I think it's one of the things that looks like your team has done a good job of working on and keeping together over there.
I would agree. It's something I like to call same pageness, right? We're all on the same page. We all like what we do, and just maintaining that.
Yeah. Yeah, there's parts of the IT world that I see that happening, and parts I don't. Kudos to you guys for that. All right, so the blog that we are covering today is yet another one by Steve Bells. This one is yet another one in the line of features explained. So Citrix features explained from May 9th, adaptive auth and access in the Citrix Secure Private Access. And access in Citrix Secure Private Access. So you want to give us just an intro into what why this blog exists and why we need to explain adaptive auth?
Yeah, I'm actually pretty excited about this one. So adaptive auth is a few things from the on-prem world that we've had for a while, things that have been a part of like the on-prem ADC for a while that have made it into, the cloud service. So listen, we got a lot of options around authentication inside of the workspace today. So if any of you guys are very familiar with how that works, you can go pick a list of authentication options when you're configuring it. In fact, we just added one last week around Google as an IDP, which is pretty slick. But I think what a lot of folks have used in the past are things around device posturing and secure or smart access and being able to provide some level of contextual access based on some of those policies. And we have made that and integrated that into the cloud now. So that's a service that anyone with DAS Premium, which was CVAD Service Premium in the past, so talking about some versions that you got access to. So it's something that if you're a customer today, you can go turn on and start using. But what's new about that is it also works with SPA, so Secure Private Access. We can front end Secure Private Access with that same adaptive authentication service, which again, completely hosted by Citrix. And it's basically, it opens up anything you can throw authentication wise at the solution, adaptive authentication can handle. And that's pretty exciting.
So I guess maybe I'm starting to understand it. So adaptive auth is auth that can understand variables real time and make determinations based on those variables?
It can. So it's a combination of a couple of different things, right? So it's definitely for sure that front end login point, but being able to, consume things like security analytics to make some of those real time decisions is a part of it. I'm not going to say that is all of the way there yet, but I think, especially from an initial, an initial solution, it's being able to turn on multi-factor right out of the cloud, being able to do the posture scanning, what we used to call endpoint analysis, out of the cloud, doing some of that contextual policy-driven auth out of the cloud. So, for instance, being able to pass tags back into your DAS platform to say, hey, because you didn't pass your EPA, you can't see certain apps, things like that. And then, honestly, just having a custom login page, which is pretty slick too. So, you've got a lot of the functionality we've had in ADC is the adaptive auth. I mean, just being very transparent, it's NetScaler is front-ending adaptive auth. So a lot of what we could do on-prem is now in the cloud as a service.
And it's not just limited to virtual app and desktop and app publishing. It's a lot of the Citrix services.
Correct. Right. So, so be specific. What are you thinking?
Secure private access, all the zero trust related things that are typically more thought of at a network layer that Citrix has gotten into and brought into the application world.
So, I would say this is very much a big part of the zero trust solution. So when we talk about adaptive authentication, that is that contextual access. That is the posturing. That is feeding into the analytics engine. I mean, that all makes up the zero trust approach, but it is front ending your virtual apps. It is front ending those SaaS apps that are not being delivered through like a Zen app, Zen desktop or DaaS service, but everything else as well. Yeah. So when you hit workspace, so when I type in my workspace URL, before I'm allowed to hit any of that application stuff, I can take you through this authentication process, which can be pretty granular.
And then I can keep looking through, security analytics, and if something changes or seems out of whack, I can then inject some type of additional new policy on the fly.
Well, security analytics will do that for you. So a lot of that, in process, or I guess in session, that happens from security analytics. So for instance, once you're in your session, we can do things like, if you're doing something that requires that you're doing from, for instance, I just had a good one, something that maybe you're downloading files too often, and you got a security analytics engine. I mean, the security analytics might kick off like a session, session recording session, right? So that's not necessarily adaptive auth. At that point, you're inside of security analytics, which is taking some of those proactive actions. But adaptive auth is really sort of the front door into the solution. And then once you're in, security analytics takes over a lot of the posturing in session and can take some proactive actions as well.
Yeah. So would that be considered part of adaptive auth, or is auth all about that entry into the system?
It's really more about auth into the entry into the system, out of the gate.
So in Steve's blog here, he talks about how adaptive auth works to improve access security. I mean, is that basically what we've been discussing?
That is what we've been discussing, right? So I'm looking through this right now. Just imagine in a hybrid scenario, you could be connecting from a corporate device. You could be connecting from some sort of personal device, a BYO device. And so, in the past with Workspace in particular, there really was no good way of, deciphering between the two, unless you used a certain, you put an ADC in your data center or in the cloud. You said, hey, I'm going to use that for authentication. Now we're sort of precluding that and saying, hey, you know what, we get the service that will do that instead. And so we can could posture that device differently and do everything out of the cloud, as opposed to having to stand up your own ADCs, which a lot of folks, to be personally honest, don't want to manage. So,
Geremy, to put that in perspective, if I look around where I'm standing right now, I've got my Windows machine, which is Windows Enterprise 10, which is joined to my Azure AD. I've got a Lenovo laptop running iGel OS. Computer in front of me is an all-in-one running iGel OS, LG all-in-one. The one beside me is a 10-plus-year-old laptop running Chrome OS for the nonprofit that I have, and then the one behind me is a Microsoft Surface Go running Windows. I literally have used all three of those to access my Citrix environment today.
Yep,
it's crazy.
It is crazy. If we're comparing devices, so I've got a Surface Laptop Studio. I think that's what they call this. Anyways, it's the next iteration of the Surface Book that I primarily work from. I also have a Surface Pro that I'll travel with. And occasionally, just so I can relate to folks, I'll pull out my MacBook and connect using that. But, being able to say, posture each of those devices and provide different tiers of access depending on what you're connecting from, and maybe maybe what from an EPA scan returns. Listen, it's pretty powerful. But honestly, one of the simplest ones is just internal, external access, right? So the idea that maybe I force a multi-factor for external but not internal is one of the simple use cases we get asked about all the time from a workspace perspective. And the only way to do it today was to stand up your own ADC to do something like that.
Yeah. And now they simple, and they're doing that with look, I've got lots of customers with NetScalers, ADCs that they own that have never made it to the Secure Auth world. Now they can, because it's a much simpler service that they never have to learn how to set up on their own.
Yep, that's correct. Now, what you get, and I'm not sure if this article gets into it. So let's scroll down here a little bit. I think this is probably what I just hit on. So why adaptive access is important for security. So part of the adaptive access story is definitely what you see here, right? So we're looking at policies that seem to be probably more security analytics, but yeah. But anyways, in this case, we're logging in with adaptive access as the front end. And once we're in, being able to feed some of that data into security analytics and then being able to leverage security analytics for some of that in-session posturing is pretty powerful.
And as far as configuring that for the administrator, you truly are going into your Citrix portal and turning that on and then saying what applications, what workflows you're going to protect?
For what, the adaptive access, or we're looking at we're talking specifically adaptive access. So when you go turn on the service, first of all, there's a new option inside of a workspace authentication where you can enable adaptive authentication. And what it does the first time out, it'll walk you through a workflow just deploying the service itself. And so, under the hood, it's NetScaler, and so that's what's being enabled and turned on. Once it's deployed, version 1 of this is very much a NetScaler UI, right? So, once you're in, you're given an IDP or an IP address to connect to. So you're basically logging into a NetScaler your first time out, and you do have access to the interface. But in this case, you've got a pair. Citrix is doing a lot of the uplift and keeping it patched. Version 1.0 of this is definitely an ADC UI, but over time, I think that'll change to be a little bit more streamlined.
So I guess maybe so let's just walk through the sections real quick, make sure I'm understanding. So how adaptive auth works to improve access security. This is the user experience side is what Steve's showing here, right?
That's what he's showing. Yep. So the user has typed in the workspace URL, and in this case, we've got workspace configured to leverage adaptive auth. So just again, going back into those configuration options. And so it'll send you to the service and walk through an authentication flow based on whatever you've got teed up. So it could be as simple as just AD and 2-factor. That's it. And that's okay too. But you can get pretty granular using, if you're familiar with some of the in-factor flows. You can make this as granular as you need it to be.
Now, if I don't have the deployed agent on my endpoint, am I going to automatically fall into some less trusted bucket?
It can be, if you've got a bucket for specifically that, right? So if you are tiering your access and you've got a bucket for just that default, you're absolutely correct.
Yeah. Okay. And then the next section is titled Why Adaptive Access. Well, help me understand the difference between adaptive access and adaptive auth. Is that just interchangeable words there, or is there a difference?
No, so adaptive auth is that front door authentication piece, and adaptive access is, once you've connected, that's the piece that's constantly sort of posturing you in session and potentially updating your risk score as well.
Okay, so that's where the security analytics would kick in and decide if things are where they should be all along the way.
Correct. Yep.
Okay. And then the last section here, it just says enable flexible access security with Citrix Secure Private Access. Is that just helping us understand how to go turn it on?
No, it's really just more of a statement that says, regardless of what your security posture is, what your requirements are, this really does open it up so we can support whatever scenario that you're talking about, right? So, for instance, if you've got a mix of access based on user group, you've got an access based on, device posture. I think we were a little bit limited in the past in terms of what we can enable cloud native. And this turns all that flexibility on, right? So like I said, we don't necessarily need an ADC on-prem to support this. You can do this in the cloud. And if you're a DAS premium customer today, you already have this. You just have to go turn it on and start leveraging it.
Is this where we should give the sysadmins out there the warning of, do it in a test environment, do it in a sandbox first, or should we just go turn it on?
So the nice thing about this, I would not disagree with you, Andy. We talk about this a lot. I think every customer should have a test dev environment. In fact, you can do that with your environment today. You could carve out some licenses to be test dev.
Easy.
But having said all that, you can enable the service. You can actually go through the process of getting familiar with it without turning it on as an authentication mechanism. So for instance, you got a lot of options when you log into your workspace config and say, hey, what do I want to use? AD with token, Okta, Azure AD, Google these days. One of those is adaptive authentication. So you can turn that on and configure it, but until you actually go say, hey, I want to use this, it's not going to do anything, right? So you're not going to monkey with anything.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's covered it. I appreciate you jumping on. I know you're talking about your team was doing some labbing of this stuff up. How'd that go?
It went pretty good. In fact, this past week we went through this with a customer, and they have a use case where they needed to use Duo Radius on-prem, and so we've gotten that configured with adaptive authentication. So I think a lot of folks would say Radius is a little old, and yet we got a lot of customers using it, and it's completely supported. And so we've gotten that working.
Yeah,
it's not bad. Pretty easy.
All right, sir. Well, I appreciate you jumping on and covering this with me, and spend a little bit of your Monday sharing the knowledge.
Sure, Andy. Anytime. See you next Monday.
All right, man. Thank you.
Yep.